The sun set low over the rugged borderlands, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. This was a land of contrasts, where the dry earth met the vibrant green of scattered oases. Dust swirled around the hooves of horses, and the air was thick with tension. Here, the lives of vaqueros and settlers intertwined, each group holding tight to their views on land and ownership. The vaqueros, skilled horsemen and ranchers, thrived in this harsh environment, their ways deeply rooted in tradition. They spoke a blend of Spanish and English, reflecting the diverse influences in these border territories. Meanwhile, newcomers like the Surveyor arrived with tools and maps, eager to stake their claims and reshape the landscape. Yet, this transformation was not welcomed by everyone. The rurales, local lawmen often backed by powerful interests, patrolled the area with a strict hand. Clad in dark uniforms and armed with Mauser rifles, they sought to assert control over the land and its inhabitants. As tension simmered, whispers of conflict floated through the air, hinting at a storm brewing beneath the surface. The clash of cultures and interests made this borderland a volatile place where every encounter could spark a fire. In this tense environment, two figures stood out amid the dust and uncertainty. One was the border vaquero, Alejandro, a tall man with sun-kissed skin and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his sharp eyes. He had spent years working the land, riding swiftly across the plains on his trusted steed, Luna. With a lasso always at his side and a deep sense of pride for his heritage, Alejandro knew every twist and turn of the rugged terrain. His life revolved around the cattle he tended and the traditions passed down through generations. On the other hand, there was Samuel, the surveyor from the east. Fresh from his city life, he was eager to make his mark in this wild land. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and carrying tools that glinted in the sunlight, Samuel appeared out of place among the weathered vaqueros. While his determination drove him to survey the borders meticulously, he lacked an understanding of the local customs and tensions simmering beneath the surface. As their paths were destined to cross, Alejandro saw Samuel as both an intruder and a rival for the land they both sought to protect in their own ways. The clash of their worlds was bound to ignite conflict. The tension in the borderlands was largely fueled by a contentious land grant dispute that had been brewing for years. It all began when a distant government issued property claims, declaring certain swaths of land available for settlement. However, much of this land was already occupied by local ranchers and vaqueros like Alejandro, who had relied on these territories for generations. These old settlers felt a deep connection to the land, viewing it as not only their livelihood but also part of their identity. They argued that the grant was unfair because it did not consider the ancestral ties and hard work they had invested in nurturing the land over time. On the other side were newcomers like Samuel, who viewed the grant as an opportunity to build a future in what they saw as unclaimed territory. The rurales, enforcing government authority, often sided with the settlers, bringing further strife into the mix. Clad in their dark uniforms and armed to intimidate, they seemed to represent not just law but also oppression. As both groups clashed over boundaries and rights, accusations flew and relationships soured. The air crackled with animosity, setting a dramatic stage where any misstep could trigger an explosive confrontation. One fateful afternoon, Alejandro rode out to the grassy fields, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. He spotted Samuel, hunched over a map, meticulously marking what he believed were the boundaries of his newfound claim. The sight ignited a fire within Alejandro. To him, it was not just land, it was part of his family's legacy, cultivated with hard work and love. As Alejandro approached, Samuel looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "I'm surveying this land," Samuel declared confidently, unaware of how his words would weigh heavily on Alejandro's heart. "It's open for settlement now." "Open for who?" Alejandro replied sharply, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "You come here with your maps and think you own what has been cared for by my people for generations. This land is not yours to claim." Samuel's brow furrowed as he struggled to understand. "The government granted it to me," he insisted, clutching his map tighter as if it could shield him from Alejandro's piercing gaze. But to Alejandro, the government's words held little weight against the deep-rooted connection he felt to the earth beneath them. The tension between them crackled like dry kindling, signaling that their encounter was only the beginning of a larger battle for rights and respect in this land they both believed belonged to them. As the sun climbed higher, the tension in the air grew thicker. Samuel, determined to assert his claim, continued to measure boundaries despite Alejandro's warnings. He set up his surveying tools with precision, chalking lines onto the earth that Alejandro had tended for years. Each mark felt like a strike against Alejandro's heritage. "If you continue this, you'll only stir up more trouble," Alejandro exclaimed, clenching his fists as he watched Samuel work. But Samuel was relentless and unwavering, shrugging off Alejandro's concerns. Suddenly, shouts echoed from a distance. The rurales had arrived on horseback, their dark uniforms and Mauser rifles glinting ominously in the sunlight. They were keen to enforce the government's claims and saw Samuel as a representation of their authority. The sight sent chills down Alejandro's spine. He knew trouble was brewing. The lead rural officer approached Samuel with an air of authority, demanding to know what was happening. "You are on government-claimed land," he barked, looking at Alejandro with disdain. As the argument escalated between Samuel and the rurales, anger filled the air. Alejandro felt a surge of determination to protect his family's land, ready to stand firm against the weight of law and authority pressing down on him. In the heat of the moment, Alejandro felt a surge of power and frustration. The confrontation with Samuel had escalated far beyond mere words, and he resolved to take matters into his own hands. With a fierce grip, he seized the collar of Samuel's shirt, dragging him away from the surveying equipment that had so offended his sensibilities. "Enough of this," Alejandro growled, his voice low and urgent, echoing with the raw intensity of border life where every decision could lead to danger. Samuel stumbled alongside him, surprised and bewildered, as Alejandro pulled him through the tall grass toward his hut. The landscape around them was stark and unforgiving, the relentless sun beat down, casting long shadows as they moved. The air thickened with tension, and every rustle in the grass hinted at unseen dangers. Alejandro's heart raced, not just from adrenaline, but from fear of what might happen if the rurales followed them. As they reached the hut, Alejandro swung open the door and shoved Samuel inside. He stood at the threshold, muscles tense, fully aware that this act of aggression could have serious consequences. The realization that he was now entangled in a larger struggle for land and identity weighed heavily on him, marking a turning point in both their lives. Inside the dimly lit hut, dust motes danced in the sunlight that filtered through cracks in the walls. Alejandro leaned against the door, breathing heavily as he faced Samuel, who was still reeling from the aggressive drag. The air felt thick with unspoken fears and conflicting emotions. "What do you want from me?" Samuel asked, his voice shaky as he took a step back, eyeing Alejandro warily. "I'm just doing my job." Alejandro's eyes narrowed. "Your job destroys lives. You think you can come here and claim what isn't yours?" He clenched his fists, grappling with the weight of generations behind him. The land was not just soil to Alejandro, it was home, heritage, and identity. Samuel's frustration bubbled over. "I have a right to be here. The government says so." He paused, realizing how hollow his defense sounded in the face of Alejandro's deep-rooted passion. "Rights mean nothing when there's no respect for what came before," Alejandro replied sharply, his voice steady yet filled with pain. The two men stood locked in their beliefs, each representing vastly different worlds and motivations. Both frightened and desperate, they faced an uncertain future shaped by forces far beyond their control, and their conflict was only beginning to unravel. As Alejandro and Samuel's heated exchange continued inside the hut, the distant sound of hooves thundered across the dry earth. The tension in the air shifted dramatically as a group of rurales emerged from the horizon, their dark uniforms stark against the golden landscape. They rode with authority, each man armed with a glinting Mauser rifle slung across his shoulder, signaling their intent to enforce the government's claim over the land. The lead officer, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the area with keen eyes. "We are here to restore order," he proclaimed, his voice booming like thunder. The rurales dismounted swiftly, boots hitting the ground with solid thuds that echoed in Alejandro's chest, making it clear that they meant business. Alejandro felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He knew all too well how ruthless these men could be when it came to enforcing their power. As they approached the hut, he exchanged a quick glance with Samuel. Both understood that their confrontation paled in comparison to the threat looming outside. "Come out," shouted the officer, signaling for them to reveal themselves. The demand hung heavy in the air, forcing Alejandro to confront not only the rurales but also the ramifications of standing firm against such overwhelming authority. As the command to emerge from the hut hung in the air, Alejandro and Samuel exchanged hurried glances, each weighing their options amid the rising tension. The rurales stood ready outside, rifles at the ready, their expressions betraying nothing but cold authority. Alejandro knew that stepping outside could mean facing not only their ire but also possible violence. "Stay calm," he whispered to Samuel, who looked pale and uncertain. "We need to think." Inside the cramped space, they could hear the rurales discussing their next moves, their voices low but urgent. Alejandro felt a pulse of anger rise within him. This land belonged to his ancestors, and he was damned if he would let armed men take it away without a fight. Samuel looked at Alejandro, fear mingling with determination in his eyes. "What if we just talk to them?" he suggested, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. "Talking won't change their minds," Alejandro replied sharply, knowing they were dealing with men who had little regard for their history or rights. As the sound of boots shuffled closer and rifles shifted in aim, both men understood that whatever decision was made next would shape not only their fates but also the future of the land they stood on. The standoff loomed heavily between them and an uncertain resolution. As the stillness of the moment hung heavily in the air, Alejandro finally decided to take a stand. With determination brewing inside him, he stepped boldly toward the door, pushing it open to confront the rurales directly. "This land belongs to my family," he shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and defiance. The lead officer narrowed his eyes at Alejandro, sizing him up as Samuel hesitated behind him, confused and shaken. The rurales shifted slightly, their rifles poised at the ready but not yet aiming. Alejandro's heart raced. He knew this was a critical moment where one wrong move could escalate into violence. "Stand down," called the officer, sensing the confrontation could erupt at any second. "We're here to enforce the law. No law can take what isn't rightfully yours." Alejandro countered fiercely, his conviction rising. In that instant, Samuel made a choice. He stepped forward beside Alejandro, finding his voice despite the odds against them. "Let's talk this through," he urged, appealing to the officer's sense of reason. The surprise of unity took everyone aback. For a fleeting moment, their combined stands created a fragile bridge between conflict and resolution, leaving all parties weighing their options as tensions hovered on a knife edge. Would they find common ground or be driven further into chaos? The decision lay in this thin balance. In the aftermath of the tense standoff, the significance of land ownership hung heavy in the air, revealing the complexities of human connection to the earth. For Alejandro, the land was his family's legacy, a tapestry woven with memories, hard work, and deep-rooted traditions. It represented not just a physical space but an extension of his identity and his ancestors' sacrifices. The thought of losing it ignited a fierce determination within him. Conversely, for Samuel, land was a means to an end, an opportunity to build a future, secure a livelihood, and prove himself in a new environment. His ambition overshadowed the historical ties that others felt toward it, making it difficult for him to fully grasp the stakes involved. As the rurales watched from a distance, this conflict reflected broader themes of power and identity, illustrating how land ownership shapes lives in border regions. The competing desires for control can ignite passion and fear, fostering both connection and division. In a landscape defined by stark contrasts, the struggle for land echoed the struggles of those who inhabit it, serving as a reminder that every patch of earth carries stories, dreams, and conflicts that shape destinies. Their choices mattered deeply, not just for themselves but for future generations that would inherit these contested spaces. In the heart of the rugged borderlands, the encounter between Alejandro, Samuel, and the rurales serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities surrounding land ownership and personal identity. Their tense exchanges reveal not only the clashing ambitions of individuals but also the deeper historical connections that tie people to their land. Ultimately, this story teaches us vital lessons about understanding and coexistence. True progress lies in recognizing that every piece of land carries with it stories and struggles that deserve respect. Alejandro's fierce connection to his family's heritage stands in stark contrast to Samuel's determination to carve out his future, highlighting how different perspectives can lead to conflict yet also offer opportunities for dialogue. The moment they united in their plea for understanding opened a door that could lead to coexistence rather than division. This confrontation illustrates that amidst turmoil, there is potential for growth through empathy. By embracing each other's backgrounds and acknowledging the significance of their shared space, individuals can find common ground in even the most challenging circumstances. The path forward may be fraught with challenges, but it is through these experiences that communities learn to stand together, ensuring a more inclusive future for generations yet to come.